Give me one reason this deal shouldn't collapse in the next 60 seconds. Tae-jun didn't raise his voice. He never did. The boardroom's air conditioning hummed louder than his words, and still every executive at the table leaned forward like he'd shouted. The man across from him, silver-haired, sweating despite the cold, fumbled through a folder. Mr. Kang, if you'll just consider. I considered it. For 4 minutes. That's 3 minutes longer than it deserved. Tae-jun closed his laptop. Withdraw the counteroffer, or I take this to your shareholders myself. Silence. Then the folder closed too, and the man nodded like something inside him had quietly given up. Tae-jun stood, buttoned his jacket, and left without a goodbye. Nobody expected one. That wasn't who he was to them, a name, a number, a man who won so consistently that losing had become a rumor about someone else's company. His assistant, Ji-woo, fell into step beside him in the hallway, scrolling through his phone without looking up. The board's calling it your cleanest kill this quarter. Don't call it that. Sorry, your cleanest negotiation. He glanced sideways. You free tonight? The AI Expo. Nexus is sponsoring the Youth Robotics Pavilion. Photo op 15 minutes, you shake some hands. Tae-jun almost said no. He always almost said no. The expo floor buzzed with light and noise, 100 booths blinking like a city built out of ambition. Tae-jun moved through it the way he moved through everything, untouched, unreachable, a glass wall walking on 2 legs. Then he heard the laugh. Not loud, just bright enough to cut through the noise, coming from a small crowd gathered around a broken display drone that 3 engineers had been fighting with for the better part of an hour. A boy, small, maybe 5, dark hair falling into serious eyes, had crouched beside it, fingers moving across the exposed wiring like he'd done it 1,000 times. You have to reset the gyroscope first, the boy said to no one, to everyone. Then the motor won't fight itself. The drone lifted an inch off the table and hovered, steady, perfect. The crowd clapped. Tae-jun didn't. He couldn't move. He knew that fix. He'd made that exact fix himself, at that exact age, in a garage that no longer existed, with hands that hadn't yet learned to close a company instead of a circuit. The boy looked up, right at him, and Tae-jun's chest did something it hadn't done in 3 years. Leo! The name cracked through the noise like a struck bell. Tae-jun turned toward the voice, and the room tilted. Min-woo stood 10 feet away, older around the eyes, sharper somehow, like grief had sanded down everything soft and left only the outline of the man Tae-jun remembered. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't anything. His gaze found Tae-jun's and simply closed, like a door that had already decided its answer. Min-woo. It came out smaller than Tae-jun intended. Min-woo didn't answer. He crossed the space in 4 steps, took the boy's hand, and said nothing. Not one word, not even a glance that lasted long enough to be called one. The silence was worse than shouting. It was surgical. They walked. Tae-jun stood frozen, watching 3 years of absence fold itself into a straight, unbothered spine disappearing into the crowd. Uncle! Tae-jun blinked. Leo had twisted back around, waving with his whole arm, grinning like Tae-jun was someone he already loved. Min-woo's hand tightened on the boy's, pulling him forward, and they were gone. Ji-woo appeared at Tae-jun's shoulder, quieter than Tae-jun had ever heard him. Sir. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking at his phone. I ran a scan when the boy touched your tablet earlier. Habit, security protocol. He turned the screen. It's not a coincidence. Tae-jun's eyes dropped to the data. That child, Ji-woo said, has your exact genetic marker. The noise of the expo kept going. Laughter, music, 100 strangers who had no idea the ground had just opened beneath one man's feet. Tae-jun didn't hear any of it. He was already running the only calculation that mattered. 3 years, 1 child, 1 silence. And somewhere beyond the crowd, a door had already closed on him. One he didn't know yet how he was going to open. If Tae-jun and Min-woo's story unsealed something in your heart too, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. This isn't the last love story we're telling. You kept it. Tae-jun said it to an empty room, to a phone screen, to no one. 3 a.m. painted the penthouse in blue silence, and in his hand sat a photo he'd deleted 100 times and somehow always recovered. Himself at 26, laughing so hard his eyes had closed. Min-woo's arms slung around his neck, both of them covered in solder burns and instant coffee stains in a garage that smelled like electricity and youth. You're going to bankrupt us both before we ever ship a product, Min-woo had said that night, stealing the last of Tae-jun's ramen. You know that, right? You'll fix it. You always fix everything. Not everything. Minwoo had smiled anyway. Just you, apparently. Tae-jun set the phone face down. The memory didn't hurt the way it used to. Now it just sat in his chest, permanent, like a splinter that had stopped being new. At 9, he canceled the Halvorsen acquisition. Sir, that's a $2 billion deal, Jiwoo said carefully, following him into the elevator. The board is asking questions. Let them ask. They're going to think you're losing control of the company. Tae-jun watched the floor numbers fall. I'm not losing control of the company. He was losing something else entirely, and for the first time in 3 years he didn't care who noticed. Minwoo's studio sat wedged between a bakery and a laundromat, a converted shopfront with a hand-painted sign that read SEO Systems in warm yellow letters. No marble. No glass towers. Just a bell over the door and the smell of coffee brewing too strong. Tae-jun stood outside it for 4 full minutes before he made himself walk in. Minwoo was behind a desk cluttered with cables, hunched over a monitor, hair falling into his eyes exactly the way it used to. He looked up. Whatever softness Tae-jun had imagined finding there had been packed away a long time ago. You need to leave. Minwoo, I'm not doing this. His voice was flat, controlled, a wall built brick by brick over 3 years. Not here. Not with him 5 minutes away at daycare. I didn't know, Tae-jun said, and hated how small it sounded. About Leo. I swear to you, I didn't know. Something flickered behind Minwoo's eyes, pain, quick and involuntary, gone before Tae-jun could name it. You don't get to swear anything to me anymore. Let me fix this. There's nothing to fix. Minwoo stood, crossed the small room, and opened the door himself. Cold air rushed in. You didn't lose a business partner, Tae-jun. You lost the right to know what happened to me. I'm not leaving until. The door shut. Not slammed, worse than that. Closed with the quiet, deliberate finality of a decision already made 3 years ago. Tae-jun stood on the sidewalk a long moment, staring at the yellow letters on the glass. Inside, Minwoo pressed his back to the door and slid down until he was sitting on the floor, knees to his chest, hands shaking so hard he had to grip his own wrists to still them. 3 years. He'd built this, every client, every late night, every square foot of this shop, with nothing but stubbornness and a son who needed him steady. He hadn't taken a single cent that could be traced back to the Kang name. Not the severance. Not the silence money. Not even the lawyer his own mother had offered, connected, as everyone was, to that family. He'd built himself back from nothing, because nothing was the only thing that was truly his. That night, after Leo was asleep with his stuffed robot tucked under one arm, Minwoo knelt in front of the bottom drawer of his desk and unlocked it with the small brass key he kept on a cord around his neck. Inside sat a single envelope, edges soft from handling, sealed, unopened. Do not open until Leo turns 18. His own handwriting. His own promise, made in a hospital room 3 years ago, to a truth he wasn't ready to give anyone, not even himself. His fingers hovered over the seal. A knock hit the door. Not Tae-jun's knock. Tae-jun's had been hesitant, uneven. This one was sharp. Practiced. 3 precise raps that belonged to someone who had never once in his life waited to be let in. Minwoo's blood went cold before he even reached the door. Did you really think I wouldn't find you? Director Han stepped into the doorway's light like he owned the air around him. Silver tie, silver smile, the kind of calm that had crushed better men than Minwoo without raising his voice. Minwoo didn't move from the threshold. You found me 3 years ago, too. I remember how that went. I remember you being sensible. Han's eyes flicked past him, into the dark apartment, toward the hallway where a child slept. You still are, I hope. Say what you came to say. Han produced an envelope from his coat. Thick, official, the kind of weight that used to mean survival. Enough to disappear properly this time. New name, new country, a school for the boy that doesn't ask questions. You did well building this little shop out of nothing. Imagine what you could build somewhere no one is watching. Minwoo looked at the envelope like it was something dead. You think I'm still the 24-year-old you scared out of a courtroom. I think you're a father now. Fathers are practical. I am. Minwoo's voice didn't shake. That's why the answer is no. Something shifted behind Han's polished expression. Not anger, worse, recalibration, the look of a man revising a plan in real time. You'll regret that. I've regretted things before. Minwoo stepped back and closed the door, slower this time, steadier than the last, like something in him had finally stopped flinching. Han stood on the empty step a moment, then turned and walked into the dark, already dialing someone. Across the city, Tae-jun sat alone in the glass-walled records division of Nexus Tech, 3 coffees deep, chasing a feeling he couldn't yet name. It had started as a small inconsistency, a maternity leave filing, unlinked to any employee ID, buried 4 folders beneath a decommissioned HR system nobody used anymore. Tae-jun almost scrolled past it. Then he saw the seal stamped across the corner. The Kang family crest. His own crest, on a private medical file, dated to the exact month Minwoo had vanished. "That can't be right," he murmured, pulling the metadata. Access logs, redacted. Filing authority, redacted. Every trace of who had touched this record had been scrubbed except one immovable detail. The classification code required his uncle's personal signature to seal. Director Han sealed this. Tae-jun's hands went cold on the keyboard. 3 years of assuming Minwoo left. 3 years of believing it was his own failure, his own blindness, his own fault for not seeing it coming. What if it had never been a choice at all? He shouldn't have had access to the physical archive, the one beneath the executive floor, steel-doored, biometric locked, reserved for records too sensitive for the cloud. But Tae-jun was still, technically, a Kang, and blood still opened doors money couldn't. The vault hummed to life around him, rows of servers blinking green in the dark. He found the terminal, entered the file code from memory, and watched the screen load line by line. Sealed record, authorization, Kang HNSEO. Date, redacted. Subject, SEO MinWO, maternity transfer/child registration. The screen went black. Not a glitch. Every light in the vault died at once, plunging the room into total, deliberate darkness. Tae-jun didn't move. He didn't need to. He already knew, before the voice reached him, exactly whose hand had found the switch. "Some things are sealed for a reason, Tae-jun." Director Han's voice came from the doorway, calm as ever, edged with something colder than Tae-jun had ever heard from him before. "Uncle, walk away now." Footsteps, unhurried, closing the distance in the dark. "Close the file. Forget the boy. Forget the man. Go back to running the company your father actually wanted you to run." Tae-jun's jaw tightened. Or what? A pause, long enough to feel like a blade being drawn slowly from its sheath. "Or you lose everything," Han said quietly. "Starting with him." The lights did not come back on. "What if I mess it up?" Leo tugged at the sleeves of his tiny lab coat, 3 sizes too big, sliding off one shoulder no matter how many times Minwoo fixed it. "You won't." Minwoo knelt and straightened the collar anyway. "You built that robot with your own 2 hands. Nobody in that room knows it better than you. Not even you? Especially not me." He tapped Leo's nose. "You've been smarter than me since you were 2. Leo grinned, nerves forgotten for a moment, and disappeared backstage with his teacher. Minwoo took a seat near the front, folding his hands tightly in his lap, refusing to let himself glance toward the door the way some traitorous part of him wanted to. He glanced anyway. And there, sliding into the back row in a plain gray hoodie, hood down, trying badly to look like nobody, sat Kang Tae-jun. Tae-jun hadn't planned to come. He'd planned, at 9 that morning, to sit through the board vote that would decide the next phase of Nexus Tech's global expansion. A vote 3 years in the making, the kind of moment that used to be the entire shape of his ambition. Instead, he'd stood outside the boardroom door, phone in hand, and typed 4 words to Juwoo. Postpone it. Something's come up. He didn't fully understand it himself. He only knew that somewhere across the city, a 5-year-old with his eyes was about to stand in front of strangers and be brave, and Tae-jun couldn't make himself care about a vote more than that. Minwoo found him within the first 10 minutes. His whole body went rigid. He half rose from his seat, ready to march to the back row and drag Tae-jun out by the collar, until he saw his face. Tae-jun wasn't performing. There was no calculation in his posture, no CEO's practiced stillness. He sat leaning slightly forward, hands clasped, watching the stage with the unguarded intensity of a man who had nothing left to protect himself with. When Leo walked out, small and trembling, and began explaining his robot in a voice too big for his body, Tae-jun's throat visibly worked. His eyes shone. He didn't wipe them. He didn't seem to notice they'd filled at all. Minwoo sat back down slowly, some of the fury draining out of him despite everything he'd promised himself. After the applause, after the parents scattered with balloons and juice boxes, Minwoo found Tae-jun waiting near the parking lot, hands shoved in his hoodie pocket, looking like a man who didn't know if he was allowed to stay. "You shouldn't have come." "I know. Leo could have seen you." "I know that too." Tae-jun met his eyes. "I couldn't stop myself." They ended up on a bench at the edge of the schoolyard. The kind of silence between them that used to be comfortable and now felt like standing on thin ice, listening for the first crack. "He's brilliant," Tae-jun said quietly. "He fixes things like you used to. Before you had to fix everything alone." Minwoo's jaw tightened. "That's the part you don't get to romanticize." He stared straight ahead. "Losing you wasn't the hardest part, Tae-jun. I want you to understand that. The hardest part was 3 years of 2 a.m. fevers and first steps and a first word I said to an empty apartment, believing the whole time you'd chosen the company over both of us. I never chose anything over you." Tae-jun's voice cracked down the middle. "I didn't even know you were pregnant." He turned to face him fully, desperate now to be believed. "I didn't know he existed, Minwoo. I swear on everything I have left, I didn't know." Minwoo went very still. The color drained slowly from his face, like something inside him had just shattered in a different, more terrifying direction. "What do you mean you didn't know?" His voice had dropped to almost nothing. "I told your uncle myself. The week before I disappeared. I sat across from him and told him everything, and he promised." He stopped, the sentence collapsing under its own weight. Tae-jun felt the ground tilt beneath him for the second time in a week. "He told me," Minwoo whispered. "He'd tell you himself." Neither of them moved. Neither of them breathed. Between them, the truth of a much older, much deeper betrayal began to surface. One neither man was ready to survive. "I told him. I told Director Han I was pregnant. He said he'd tell you himself." Minwoo said it again, quieter this time, like repetition might change the shape of what it meant. The first drops of rain started falling as he spoke, dotting his shoulders, sliding down the collar of his coat. Tae-jun stared at him, the pieces assembling themselves into something he didn't want to see. "He never told me anything. I know that now." Minwoo's laugh came out broken, nothing like a laugh at all. "I sat in his office. I was so scared, Tae-jun. I actually thought he'd help me tell you. I thought that's what family did." The rain thickened, blurring the streetlights into halos. Tae-jun's mind dragged him backward, unwillingly, to a week he'd buried 3 years ago. The sudden espionage charges that appeared out of nowhere, accusing Minwoo of leaking prototype designs to a rival firm. He remembered the confusion. He remembered his uncle's calm, steady voice telling him it was better this way. Better to let Minwoo go quietly than drag the company through a scandal. "Protect the succession line," Han had said. An engineer with no name behind him was never going to be the one standing beside the next Kang heir. "You know that. You've always known that." Tae-jun had believed him. He had let the man he loved disappear because his own uncle told him it was necessary, and he had been too young, too trusting, too blind to ask why the timing lined up so perfectly with a pregnancy he was never told about. "He fabricated it," Tae-jun said, voice hollow. "The espionage charges. He built a case out of nothing to make you leave before I ever found out about Leo." Minwoo's chin trembled, the anger and the grief finally arriving together, 3 years too late and all at once. "He threatened me with prison, Tae-jun. I had nothing, no lawyer, no name, nothing but a positive test and a due date. I ran because I thought that was the only way to keep our son safe. I let him do it." Tae-jun's voice cracked wide open. "I signed off on believing you'd betrayed me instead of asking a single real question. I chose the easy story instead of you. Tae-jun, I let my uncle erase you." He was shaking now, and it had nothing to do with the cold. "I let him erase both of you." The rain came down harder, soaking through his hoodie, through Minwoo's coat, neither of them moving to find shelter. Tae-jun's knees hit the wet pavement before he even decided to kneel. It wasn't a performance. There was no audience left to perform for, no board, no cameras, nothing but the two of them and 3 years of silence finally breaking apart in the rain. "I'm sorry," he said, and it came out in pieces, barely words at all. "I'm sorry I didn't fight harder. I'm sorry you had him alone. I'm sorry for every night you were scared and I wasn't there because I believed a lie instead of you." Minwoo stood over him for a long moment, rain running down his face, indistinguishable now from anything else. Then slowly he knelt too. Their foreheads nearly touched, both of them drenched, both stripped down to something neither had let the other see in 3 years. Not anger, not pride, just the raw, unguarded ache that had been sitting underneath everything since the night he disappeared. "I hated you for a long time," Minwoo whispered. "I think some part of me still does. I know, but I don't think I ever stopped." He didn't finish it. He didn't have to. His hand found Tae-jun's in the space between them, fingers cold and shaking, and for the first time in 3 years, Tae-jun felt him hold on instead of pull away. Neither of them saw the flash. It came from across the street, quick and precise, a lens catching two men kneeling together in the rain, hands intertwined. Faces close enough to be mistaken for something the whole city would have an opinion about by morning. By the time the shutter clicked a second time, the photographer was already gone. By sunrise, the image was already moving, captioned, cropped, sharpened into a headline built to burn everything both of them had just started, dangerously fragilely, to rebuild. Turn it off. If you cried, screamed, or yelled at your screen even once during this story, you're one of us. Subscribe and join the family for more BL dramas just like this one. Jiwoo didn't turn it off. He stood frozen in the doorway of Tae-jun's office, phone in one hand, remote in the other, while the wall screen looped the same headline in red and white. Nexus Tech CEO in scandalous rendezvous. Secret love child allegations surface. The photo beneath it, Rain, two men kneeling, hands locked, had already crossed 4 million views. Sir, the board's called an emergency session. 10 minutes. Tae-jun didn't move from the window. Let them. The boardroom was colder than usual. Or maybe it only felt that way with 14 faces turned toward him, like he was already something to be voted off the island. This is a liability the shareholders cannot absorb, said one of the older members, sliding a printed copy of the article across the table like evidence at a trial. A hidden child. A public scandal. The optics alone. The optics, Tae-jun repeated flat. We're proposing a temporary transfer of executive authority, another voice added, smoother, rehearsed. One of the three members Tae-jun had long suspected answered to his uncle before they answered to him. Until the matter is resolved. Tae-jun looked around the table slowly, memorizing which faces wouldn't meet his eyes. Vote if you want to vote. I'm not resigning, and I'm not hiding. Across the city, Minwoo stood at his front window watching 3 vans with satellite dishes park outside Leo's school gate. Mr. CO? The principal's voice on the phone was gentle, apologetic, terrified. We had to move the children inside early. There are reporters at the fence asking for Leo by name. Minwoo's hand tightened on the phone until his knuckles went white. I'm coming now. He grabbed his coat, then stopped in the doorway, chest heaving, old instincts clawing back to the surface. Pack light. Take the emergency cash. Don't look back. You've done this before. You can do it again. His eyes landed on the locked drawer across the room. The envelope. 3 years of running dressed up as safety. He didn't move toward it. For the first time, some stubborn, exhausted part of him refused to let fear make the decision alone. By 6 that evening, Tae-jun stood behind a podium in the Nexus Tech atrium, camera flashes strobing white across his face, dozens of microphones angled toward him like blades. I won't waste your time denying anything, he said, voice steady despite the storm behind his ribs. The boy in that photograph is my son. His name is Leo. I did not know he existed until 11 days ago, and that failure belongs entirely to me and to people close to me who chose silence over honesty. The room erupted in noise. He didn't flinch. Seo Minwoo did nothing wrong. He built a life and raised our son alone under circumstances he did not create and did not deserve. If anyone in this room, or anywhere else, tries to make this about his character, you will be wrong, and I will correct you personally. A reporter shouted a question about the espionage charges from 3 years prior. Tae-jun's jaw tightened. Those charges were fabricated, he said. I intend to find out exactly who manipulated that situation, and why, no matter whose name is attached to the answer. The room quieted, sensing the shift, sensing he meant it. Then a board member near the back rose from his seat, the same smooth-voiced man from the morning meeting, and lifted a hand for the microphone runner. Mr. Kang. His voice carried easily across the silence. If Director Han knew about this child 3 years ago and said nothing, he let the pause stretch, deliberate, cruel. Isn't that a direct violation of the succession clause he himself authored? The one requiring immediate disclosure of any legitimate heir. The room turned as one, cameras swinging toward the back like a single-held breath. Tae-jun's stomach dropped before his eyes even found the source. Because standing at the very back of the atrium, arms folded, expression calm as still water, stood Director Han. Smiling. You handled that better than I expected. Director Han's voice was calm inside the small mirrored box of the elevator, floor numbers climbing in silence between them. You knew, Tae-jun said. Not a question. 3 years ago. You knew Minwoo was pregnant and you buried it. I protected this family. Han straightened his cuffs, unhurried, as if they were discussing quarterly earnings. An engineer with no name, no lineage, carrying the next Kang heir out of wedlock. Do you understand what that would have done to the succession filings? To the shareholders? It was a scandal waiting to happen, and I stopped it before it happened. You didn't stop anything. Tae-jun's voice stayed low, dangerous. You destroyed 2 people to protect a family name that never asked to be protected that way. I made a business decision. Han finally turned to face him, and there it was, the mask fully gone, nothing underneath but cold, unapologetic calculation. One I'd make again. The elevator chimed. Neither of them moved. Here's what happens now, Han said. You issue a statement tonight. You renounce the boy publicly. Call the photograph a misunderstanding, call the engineer an opportunist, and this entire embarrassment disappears within a news cycle. Or I call in every board member who still owes me their seat, Han said. And I trigger a hostile takeover by Friday. Everything your father built, gone, sold in pieces to competitors who'll wear his name like a costume. You'll have your love story, Tae-jun. You'll have nothing else. The doors opened. Neither of them stepped through. Tae-jun looked at his uncle for a long moment, really looked, the way he hadn't in years, and understood, finally, that the man standing in front of him would burn down every good thing in Tae-jun's life and call it protection until his last breath. Then take it. Han blinked. Excuse me? Take the company. Tae-jun stepped past him into the hallway, voice steady, unshaking. Take the board. Take my father's name off the building if it makes you feel like you won something. I'm done choosing it over them. I did that once already, and it cost me 3 years I'm never getting back. You'd throw away everything he built for a man who ran from you and a child you met 11 days ago? Tae-jun stopped, didn't turn around. I'd throw away everything you built for them. There's a difference. He kept walking. Enjoy the takeover. Min-woo stood frozen just inside the open office door down the hall, one hand pressed flat against the frame, having heard every word since the elevator chimed. He hadn't meant to overhear it. He'd come to drop off documents Tae-jun's legal team had asked for, proof, evidence, anything to unravel the fabricated charges. And instead he'd stood rooted in place while a man dismantled his own empire in real time, without flinching, without negotiating, without asking for anything in return. He's really doing it, Min-woo thought, chest aching in a way he didn't have language for yet. He's actually choosing us. It terrified him more than the takeover threat itself. Because loving Tae-jun once had cost him everything already. His career, his name, 3 years of raising a child alone in the wreckage of that first collapse. And now the same man was standing in a hallway, calmly setting fire to his father's legacy, and Min-woo didn't know if his heart could survive watching him do it twice. Tae-jun turned the corner and saw him there, papers forgotten in his hand, eyes wide with something between awe and dread. Neither of them said anything. There wasn't anything left to say that the hallway hadn't already said for them. That night, after Tae-jun's car dropped him at the curb with a promise to call in the morning, Min-woo went through the quiet rituals of putting his son to bed. A story, half finished, a glass of water on the nightstand, a kiss to the forehead. An hour later, he opened Leo's door to check on him one last time before sleep. The bed was empty. The window stood open, curtains lifting gently in the night air, and on the floor beside the bed, discarded and small and utterly wrong in its stillness, lay Leo's stuffed robot, the one he never went anywhere without. Min-woo's scream tore through the apartment before his mind had even finished understanding why. Leo! Min-woo's scream tore down the hallway before he even realized he was moving, throwing open closets, checking under the bed, screaming a name into a silence that refused to answer. By the time Tae-jun burst through the door 12 minutes later, jacket half on, hair still wet from the shower he'd been ripped out of, Min-woo was on his knees in the middle of the living room, phone shaking uselessly in his hand. He's gone, Min-woo said, voice cracking apart. The window was open. He's gone, Tae-jun. Look at me. Tae-jun dropped down in front of him, hands gripping his shoulders. We're going to find him. I don't care what it costs. Within the hour, Tae-jun had mobilized more resources than the board had ever seen him spend on a single afternoon. Private security, 3 former intelligence contacts who owed him favors he'd never planned to call in, every camera feed within a 6-block radius pulled and cross-referenced in real time. Optics don't matter anymore, he told Jiwoo flatly, when someone dared mention the press outside might notice the sudden convoy of black SUVs. Nothing matters but finding him. At 1 a.m., a message arrived on an untraceable number, routed through 3 proxy servers before it reached Tae-jun's phone. You know what you took from this family. Consider this a reminder that some debts don't stay buried. No demand. No number to call. Just enough venom to point a finger. It's him, Minwoo said, reading over Tae-jun's shoulder, voice shaking with fury now instead of grief. It's your uncle. Tae-jun called Han directly, no preamble, no patience left. Where is he? I have no idea what you're talking about. For the first time since Tae-jun had known him, his uncle's composure cracked at the edges. Real alarm bleeding through the careful control. I threatened your company, Tae-jun, not a child. I'm many things. I am not that. Tae-jun almost didn't believe him. Almost. If it's not him, Minwoo said quietly, staring at the message again, then who else wants leverage over Nexus Tech badly enough to do this? The question sat between them, heavier than either wanted to name. By 3 a.m., the search had stretched thin, exhaustion fraying every voice in the command room Tae-jun's team had assembled. Minwoo stood at the window, arms wrapped around himself, staring out at a city that had swallowed his son somewhere inside it. This is my fault, he whispered. It's not. If I hadn't let you back in. Minwoo. Tae-jun crossed the room and turned him gently by the shoulder. This isn't happening because of us. Don't you dare carry that. Minwoo's control finally broke. 3 years of holding everything together alone collapsing all at once. A sob tearing out of him that he'd been swallowing since the moment he found that empty bed. Tae-jun didn't say anything else. He simply pulled him in, arms wrapping fully around him, holding on the way he should have 3 years ago, the way he'd give anything to have never stopped doing. Minwoo clutched the front of his shirt like it was the only solid thing left in the world, and for a long moment neither of them moved, the crisis around them fading into something smaller than the two of them standing there, finally, fully together. Sir. One of the security analysts broke the silence, voice tight. We've got something. They crowded around the monitor. Grainy footage from a corner camera 3 blocks from Minwoo's apartment showed a figure approaching the building's side entrance just after 11. A woman, elegant, unhurried, crouching down to Leo's height at the fire escape below his window. The audio was gone, but the body language wasn't. She smiled at him. He didn't run. He took her offered hand like he already knew her. Zoom in, Tae-jun said, throat tight. The image sharpened, resolving her face frame by frame until there was no mistaking it. Tae-jun went very still. I know her, he said, barely audible. Minwoo turned to him, dread pooling cold in his stomach. Who is she? Seoa. Tae-jun's voice was hollow, disbelieving. My family arranged us to marry when we were children. I haven't seen her in years. I thought that whole thing was buried. Minwoo stared at the frozen image of the smiling woman leading his son away by the hand, and felt the last of his composure drain out of him entirely. Why? He whispered. Does she have our son? Can I go home now? Leo's crayon paused mid-stroke, his small voice cutting through the quiet of the unfamiliar living room. Seoa sat across from him, hands folded in her lap, watching him with an expression that wasn't unkind, exactly. Just distant, distracted, like a woman running calculations behind her eyes. Soon, sweetheart. I promise. You promise? Promise. She almost smiled at that. Almost. 2 hours earlier, in the command room, Tae-jun had stared at Seoa's frozen image on the screen, the pieces assembling into something he hadn't let himself believe until now. The arrangement, he said slowly. My father and her family signed it when we were children. I thought it died the day I told my father I wouldn't honor it. Clearly someone kept it alive, Minwoo said, already pulling up property records on his own laptop, fingers flying. If she still believes she's owed that marriage. Then someone convinced her the scandal was the only thing standing in her way. Tae-jun's jaw tightened. My uncle. Minwoo found the address 40 minutes later. A property registered under a shell company, buried 3 layers deep, the kind of trail only someone who'd spent years hunting corrupted filings would know how to follow. There. A house outside the city. Registered the same month Han sealed Leo's birth record. Tae-jun looked at him. Really looked, something steady passing between them that hadn't been there in years. You found this in 40 minutes. I told you. Minwoo grabbed his coat. I fixed things. They drove in silence that wasn't tense anymore, just focused, 2 people finally moving in the same direction instead of past each other. Seoa opened the door before they knocked, as if she'd been waiting, resigned already to however this ended. He's safe, she said quickly, stepping back to let them see Leo curled on the couch with a coloring book. I would never have hurt him. You have to believe that. Then why? Minwoo said, voice raw. Would you take him at all? Seoa's composure finally cracked. Years of quiet devotion to a promise nobody else remembered spilling out at once. Director Han told me if the scandal disappeared, the arrangement could still happen. He said Tae-jun just needed time. Space from the distraction. Her eyes filled. I thought if the boy simply wasn't part of the story anymore, even for a little while, it would all go back to how it was supposed to be. None of this was ever supposed to be anything, Tae-jun said, gentler than she probably expected. That arrangement died a long time ago, Seoa. My uncle kept it alive because it gave him leverage over both of us. You're not his weapon. You never had to be. She stared at him, something breaking loose behind her eyes. Recognition, maybe, of just how long she'd been someone else's instrument. I can help you get out from under his control, Tae-jun said quietly. Legally, financially, whatever it takes. But I need my son back right now. Seoa looked at Leo, then at the door, then finally nodded, tears slipping free as she stepped aside. Leo, Minwoo breathed, crossing the room in 3 strides and dropping to his knees, arms wrapping around his son so tightly Leo squeaked in protest. Daddy, you're squishing me. I don't care. Minwoo sobbed into his hair, every ounce of terror from the last 6 hours breaking loose at once. I don't care, I don't care. Tae-jun knelt beside them, wrapping his arms around them both, forehead pressed to the top of Leo's head, holding on like letting go might undo the moment entirely. For one suspended breath, standing in a stranger's doorway, the 3 of them were simply, finally whole. Then the night exploded into red and blue light. Sirens surrounded the house from every direction, cutting through the quiet like a blade. Reporters' cameras flashed white against the windows, and Tae-jun rose slowly, shielding Leo instinctively, watching a black car roll to a stop at the edge of the driveway. Director Han stepped out, flanked by uniformed officers on one side and a wall of press on the other, his voice pitched loud and steady for every microphone within reach. There he is, Han announced, pointing directly at Tae-jun with theatrical, practiced horror. The man who kidnapped a child from his own fiancée's care. Cameras surged forward, flashes strobing white across the doorway, capturing Tae-jun frozen mid-motion with his son in his arms. The image already, unmistakably, being shaped into a headline no truth would be fast enough to outrun. Arrest him. Han's voice rang out clean and confident over the wash of sirens, pointing at Tae-jun still holding his son against the doorway light. Tae-jun didn't flinch. For the first time in his life, the fear wasn't about the company, the board, or the names stitched into every building he owned. It was only about the 2 people standing behind him. Before anyone arrests anyone, he said, loud enough to carry over the crowd, there's something you all need to see. He pulled out his phone, hands steady despite everything, and nodded to Ji-woo, who'd been trailing 3 steps behind since the drive out. The recovered archive file, pulled from the vault before the lights had ever gone dark, quietly restored over the past week by a favor Tae-jun hadn't dared mention until now, began streaming live across every screen in the driveway, patched simultaneously into the emergency board feed. The maternity record. The sealed classification. Han's own signature authorizing the fabricated espionage charges 3 years prior, buried under a family crest he'd used like a shield his entire life. The crowd's noise shifted, murmurs turning sharp, cameras swinging away from Tae-jun and toward the man who'd orchestrated the entire spectacle. This is manipulated, Han said, but his voice had lost its polish, cracking at the edges as reporters began shouting new questions over each other. It's authenticated, Tae-jun said quietly. Every access log, every timestamp. You sealed my son's existence to protect a merger that never should have mattered more than a family. Seoa stepped forward from the shadow of the doorway, voice trembling but clear. He orchestrated the arrangement to control us both. I have the records of every payment, every threat. She looked at Han without flinching for the first time in years. I'm done being his leverage. By morning, the board's emergency vote was unanimous. By the following week, the same police who'd arrived with sirens for Tae-jun were the ones leading Han out in handcuffs. A decade of fraud and manipulation, finally catching up to the one man who'd believed himself untouchable. Months passed like a held breath finally released. Nexus Tech kept its name, but little else stayed the same. A new CEO, steady and unremarkable in the best way, took the helm while Tae-jun quietly stepped back from the empire he'd spent his whole life building. In its place, he built something smaller, warmer. A mentorship foundation for young engineers who reminded him, more than he ever said out loud, of a boy fixing a broken drone at a tech expo, and of the man who'd taught him everything he knew about fixing things before either of them had learned how to fix themselves. Minwoo ran the technical side. It was, everyone agreed, the only partnership that made sense. If you cried, screamed, or yelled at your screen even once during this story, you're one of us. Subscribe and join the family for more BL dramas just like this one. The apartment was quiet that evening. Leo cross-legged on the living room floor, tongue between his teeth in concentration, wiring together a small robot with the same instinctive certainty he'd had since he was 5. Minwoo sat curled into Tae-jun's side on the couch, head resting against his shoulder, watching their son with the kind of stillness that used to feel impossible. I spent years building an empire to prove I was enough, Tae-jun said softly, more to himself than anyone. It took losing everything to learn I already had everything that mattered. Minwoo tilted his face up. That's disgustingly sentimental for a man who used to negotiate people into the ground. You're the only person who ever negotiated me into anything real. Minwoo huffed a laugh against his shoulder, but his eyes were soft, unguarded home. Leo looked up from his robot, crayon-marked fingers pausing on a loose wire. Are you staying for dinner, Uncle Tae-jun? Minwoo smiled, brushing a hand through his son's hair. He's not your uncle anymore, baby. Tae-jun's eyes went glassy, waiting, hardly daring to breathe. Minwoo looked at him. Really looked, the way he had that very first night in the garage years ago, before any of this, before all the things that had tried to tear them apart and failed. He's your dad. Leo blinked, then grinned, entirely unbothered by the enormity of it, already turning back to his robot like the world had simply rearranged itself into its correct shape. Tae-jun pulled Minwoo closer, pressing a kiss to his temple, watching their son build something small and perfect on the floor in front of them. Home. Whole. Unsealed.